Thank you all for coming. I have been running the Environmental Treasures Program for over 20 years. There have been free monthly nature tours ever since April 2000. So we have been doing a whole series on exploring the Neponset River. And there's a river walk that goes all along with the river in Quincy. And this is going to be part of that. And we have like one more program coming up, a walk on April 18th. It's free, but you have to sign up for it. It's mentioned the Quincy Sun too. It's going to be around 2.5 miles. It's going to take around 2 hours. And we're going to walk over the admin part of the river walk and then cross over and look at where they want to extend the river walk in Quincy from the Boston side. So if you think you'd be interested, I have a few spots left, and one's on the weekday, April 18th at 2:30, and I have another one April 22nd at 2 p.m. So I want to thank, and also if you're interested, if you are not, if you're not on one of our tours, they're free. And you can see me afterwards. I send out email notices of the tours, and they get filled up pretty quickly. So if you want to be on the email list, you can see me afterwards. So right now, I'm very grateful to Andres Ripley and the Neponset River Watershed Association. He's going to be leading the tour on April 18th, and he's going to be talking tonight. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me fine if I'm over here too and move around a little bit? Great. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Andres Ripley, and I'm the Green Waste Manager at the Neponset River Watershed Association. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization, some of the challenges we face, and some of the work that we do to try to combat some of those challenges. If you have any questions at all while I'm presenting, feel free to raise your hand. We'll also have time at the end for some questions as well. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the geographic area that we're working in. So the Neponset River Watershed basically goes from Foxborough down in Gillette Stadium, or near Gillette Stadium when the Patriots are playing. And the river itself is traveling through the heart of the watershed all the way up for about 30 miles, and it's emptying into the Dorchester or the Boston Harbor. The watershed, I want to explain kind of what that term actually means. So watershed is basically a geographic area of land where all the water in that area is draining to one central point. So of course in the Neponset watershed, all the water is draining into the center, which again is where the river is running down the middle of it, and it's all heading out into the Boston Harbor. The watershed itself, in terms of some of its characteristics, there's about 14 towns and cities in the watershed. We have over 330,000 people living in it, and about a third of those people are actually getting their drinking water from within the watershed boundaries, which is a really important fact that we'll talk about in a little while. So, who is NEPRA? So our organization has been around now for a little over 50 years. We were founded back in 1963 as a grassroots conservation organization. Those folks you see up here at the top were dedicating basically their time as volunteers to protecting and cleaning the river. And since then, over the past 50 years, our mission has more or less stayed the same. We've kind of expanded a little bit to doing some more efforts when it comes to cleaning and protecting it. But again, the big goal that we always try to tackle is making sure the river is clean, safe, and accessible for all the residents who live within the watershed boundaries. So let's talk about some of the challenges that we're facing as an organization. I think one of the more obvious ones that people can probably think of on their own is that there's a lot of dumping issues happening along the river and the tributaries and some of the land that is near the bodies of water. It's very easy for areas that are wooded or are harder for people to see, for people just to kind of come by, throw trash bags, throw old kitchen debris. We've seen all kinds of things in our cleanups that I'll talk about in a little while. But that is definitely one of the problems that we face a lot and that we try to tackle. Another problem that's probably a little bit less obvious is the industrial pollution that we face nowadays. The Neponset has a very rich industrial history, and even well after the industrial uses have kind of been a thing of the past, we still see a lot of the effects on the river today. For example, we have some chemicals that we call legacy chemicals that have basically been around since the industrial days. They're still in the mud or the sediment in the river. There's a lot of work going on right now with NEPRA and the Environmental Protection Agency trying to clean up a portion of the river that we'll talk about in a little while. The biggest source of pollution, and probably the biggest thing that we try to tackle, is actually stormwater pollution, which you can see down there on the bottom left-hand side. So stormwater pollution is when you have all the chemicals on the street mixed in with the plastics and the cigarettes and all the bacteria from dog waste, things like that are all coming together with the rain. Then they rush into the storm drain, which a lot of people don't know, but actually go to the nearest body of water. So you can imagine that, especially in Quincy and some of the Boston neighborhoods, we have lots of storm drains, lots of pipes bringing that water into the Neponset, and it has a large effect on the water quality. And then the fourth problem that I want to talk about today as well is that we have a lot of structural barriers that have huge impacts on the habitat when it comes to a lot of the animals that are living within the river. We have a couple dams that are very large, like the Baker Chocolate Dam in Dorchester and the T&H Dam in Hyde Park. But we also have a couple hundred very small rock or stone dams that look nothing like this, but still have massive impacts on the habitat and how far fish and other species can really grow. So let's talk about some of the different programs we have that are trying to tackle some of those challenges. The first one, and one of our biggest programs that's been around for over 25 years, is our Citizen Water Monitoring Network, or SWMN for short. We basically have over 60 volunteers that once a month throughout the spring and the summertime go out to a designated site across the watershed and are collecting a water sample. We're testing for certain things like bacteria, and specifically E. coli, pH levels of the water, the dissolved oxygen levels in the water, and about 4 or 5 other parameters that are giving us a pretty comprehensive idea of what the water quality is like and what some of the challenges that specific body of water is facing. Since we've been doing it for over 25 years now, we have a pretty good backlog of the data. We've been able to kind of see how the water quality is progressing over the years and which areas are kind of staying as our more hotspot areas. And one way that we like to look at this data, we like to present it to the public, is by creating a report card. We've actually been working with the Charles River Watershed Association as well as the Mystic River Watershed Association to kind of streamline a process to create a report card to look at the different parameters that we're testing for. This one specifically was our 2021 E. coli report card. We're still putting the 2022 report card together, but more or less actually the data looks very similar between 2021 and 2022. And you can see that based on the data, we kind of have a wide range of water quality across the watershed. We have a lot of places that are meeting swimmable standards every single time we test that water. We have some that are meeting it maybe 5 out of the 6 times or in that range, and then we have some that are really never meeting the swimmable standard, which is a problem. And those bodies of water specifically, Germany Brook and Meadow Brook, which are in the Norwood area, in the heart of the watershed, and then also Unwoody Brook up here in the Milton-Quincy area, face really high E. coli on a constant basis. There's a couple reasons behind that, and we think, but we're doing a lot of work with those towns to try to figure out if we can stop the E. coli from getting into these bodies of water and make them more swimmable and safe for the community year-round. Like I said, one of the big issues we're facing is the stormwater pollution, and that is actually one of the ways that the E. coli is making its way into our bodies of water. A lot of these pipes in our towns are old and they can easily have cracks or leaks in them, so if you have stormwater pipes going in a certain direction and you maybe have sewer pipes going in that same direction, it's easy for some pipes to maybe mix contaminants and you can get E. coli in that way. We can also get E. coli in the rivers a lot when you have dog waste bags being left on the street or no one's even picking up after the dogs, and that's an easy way for the E. coli to also get in. There's a few other different reasons, but again, that is one of the big reasons, and that's something that we try to work with a lot with the towns, is figure out which pipes are old and broken, which areas we're seeing really high levels of E. coli, and what can we do to combat that. The other way that we try to improve water quality is through habitat restoration. We've been doing this for quite a while now. There's a couple different programs I want to talk about up here. One of the ones that doesn't happen too often, but I think it at least feels the most impactful, is when we're doing smaller dam removals like you'll see in the middle there. Again, the dam I showed you earlier, the Baker Chocolate Dam, looks very different than that dam you see in the middle, but they both have very big effects on the habitat. So these dams, again, you have a couple hundred of them still in the watershed, but when we can work with the cities and the towns or the state to remove them, it allows for the river, or the pond that was behind the dam really, to go back into a stream or a river. That really cools the water down. It allows for tree coverage a lot more. And it keeps a lot more of the dissolved oxygen in the water. And just like we like oxygen up here, the fish and the animals who live in the water love dissolved oxygen, especially the trout that we have throughout the watershed. You have a question?
Those small dams are man-made, they're not piles of rocks or sticks or something. Okay,
That
they're
is correct.
constructed to dam up the area.
Exactly. That's a great question. Yes, so they were constructed, they're all man-made dams. Beaver dams are completely different. We like beaver dams for the most part. We want to keep beavers where they are. But yes, these dams are man-made dams that had old industrial use. They've kind of been abandoned for decades and even centuries in some cases, and they, again, have huge effects on the water quality and the fish habitat that are in there. So in addition to the dam removals, we also like to do a program that we've been working on for a couple of years, which is our Embrace a Stream program. And these are 2 images showing some of the activities we do with the Embrace a Stream program. The first one up here is actually a tree planting activity that we like to do in a couple of the bodies of water, where again, part of that stream bank might be eroding away. There's a lot of sunlight hitting that one portion of the stream that's heating up the water, and the trout and other animals don't love that. And so what we try to do is we try to plant these little stakes that will eventually have trees and bushes growing out of them that again will better shade it and also have that root system kind of keep all that soil in place so you have less erosion problems. When we have these big storms and all that storm water is rushing into these tiny brooks, they can't really handle all that water at once, and that leads to a lot of erosion issues, which is why, one of the reasons why we're trying to plant some more stakes like this. The other part of the Embrace the Stream program that we were doing about a summer ago is our eDNA feature, where basically we can collect a water sample and run it through a very specific testing program where that test can detect trout DNA up to 1 kilometer away from where that one sample was taken. So this is allowing us to basically figure out where the trout are most popular in certain streams, so we can compare it to past data that we had based on where we've seen trout over the years, see if they're still there, see if they're not there anymore, why aren't they there anymore, and it can allow us to, again, look into further habitat restoration. And then up there on the top left, I also wanted to point out that we do a lot of invasive removals, which also improves the habitat. That image up there was taken, I think, in the summer of 2020, where we removed some water chestnut from a pond in Canton. We also love to remove, when we can, knotweed, mile a minute, all kinds of invasives to try to, again, improve the habitat, keep the invasive quantity down within the watershed, and make it safer for all the animals who live in it. So in addition to trying to improve the watershed through the habitat restoration, we're also doing cleanups at least twice a year. We've been running cleanups now for over 10 years, and I think at this point we've collected at least 150 tons of trash over the past 10 years of these cleanups. We remove all kinds of things like tires and like the shopping carts you see here, of course all kinds of plastic bottles and all other debris. We've even found cars in some parts of the river before that have been abandoned there for over 40 years at this point, and that's always interesting to have the police come and pull that out and see what happens with it. So again, we've been doing this stuff for a while now. We've actually gotten to the point, and it's kind of a good issue, that it's hard for us to find this big trash anymore because we've removed so much of it. There's still a lot of the microplastics that we're trying to remove in some areas that definitely still need our help. But it's been great to see over the past 10 years some real improvements when it comes to removing a lot of the trash that we're finding in the river. So another way that we try to protect the river and the watershed is by education. So we actually go to almost all the 5th grade classes at this point within the watershed, including, I believe, all the schools in Quincy, to teach the 5th graders about water conservation and stormwater pollution. It's part of their 5th grade curriculum, and we love being able to go in and kind of give them an interactive activity where we look at where their drinking water is coming from, some of the problems that it faces before it gets to their house, how they can better conserve water by taking shorter showers and other activities. And then we look at stormwater pollution and what's happening when you might throw a chip bag outside or you don't pick up after your dog, and again, how that's getting into the body of water. So this is a very impactful way that we're able to work with the kids. It feels very rewarding, and it's always interesting to actually have the kids go home and talk to their parents, and then when we see them the next day to talk about the other lesson, they tell us all the things they told their parents and how even their parents didn't know some of the stuff that we were teaching them. So again, it's nice to see this impact, and we really enjoy going into the schools. And in addition to that education work, we also do a good amount of advocacy work. So we try to work a lot with the local elected officials and the other watershed associations and other river groups to advocate for certain laws and bills to be passed to have stricter, what's the word I'm looking for? Stricter modifications when it comes to, let's say, like if there's a drought, or if there's like a huge flood happening in a certain area. We're trying to work with the towns to look at the infrastructure. So we're working a lot with the elected officials and with these groups to, again, pass these things to protect our watershed in the long run. Any questions so far about anything? Okay. So the program that is near and dear to my heart is our Greenways program. I'm going into a little bit more detail about this. It's actually one of our newer programs. We've been working on Greenway-related efforts for a good amount of time now, but this program is only about 4 years old. And the goal of this program is to really bring a lot of our communities, specifically in the lower Neponset, where there's a real lack of access to the river, closer to the Neponset River. The reason why we really focus in the lower Neponset is because, again, like I mentioned, it has some real industrial use history behind it. There is like a trapezoid shape to the river there, and it's really hard for people to get down to it. And so by improving the access, by working with the state in these neighborhoods to create parks and trails, it allows people who live in Quincy, Dorchester, Mattapan, Milton, Hyde Park to get better access to the Neponset River. One of our staple projects that I want to talk about a little bit is our Edgewater Drive project in Mattapan. This area is actually just south of Mattapan Square, which you see up there at the top. And basically, there is this beautiful section of green space that runs between the river and the Edgewater Drive neighborhood. And a lot of folks who live on Edgewater Drive or even live near River Street have lived there for a couple decades and don't even know why it's called River Street, don't know why it's called Edgewater Drive, have never even gone near the Neponset River. Which, it's crazy to think about, but the reason why that is because there's a 4-foot tall stone wall that has been there for over 100 years basically at this point, or close. It was built in 1930s. But it's completely separating the community from the river and that green space. About 15 years ago, DCR, who owns the green space back here and owns the wall, they created one wall opening in it and created a canoe launch down there, which is a great feature, but it's not the most enticing or safe, because if you're walking down there and there's an emergency or you feel like you're in danger for whatever reason, you have to walk back however far you walk down to get out of that one entrance point. So for a while, the community's been advocating and saying, we really want to have better access to this space, we want to have better access to nature. And unfortunately, it took DCR a really long time to put the resources into this community in an environmental justice neighborhood where they really needed it. So it took a lot of other organizations to kind of come in and help them out, to lift up their voices. We worked with them in that advocacy effort. And luckily, in 2021, DCR committed this to being one of their capital projects. And over the past couple of years, we've now gotten to 50% design plan. It's a little bit hard to see some of the details, but basically there's different amenities that are being shown here, like improved canoe launches and even adding another canoe launch. Having a couple river overlooks, people can see the beautiful part of the river that's in their neighborhood. We even have some exercise equipment and improved playground space. People have been looking to get chess tables back there. So again, all these different amenities that are going to, one, make it more safe and inviting, but also allows people to better connect with the river and then become bigger stewards of the Neponset and the green space that is right along the river.
So this is in plan, but do you have a date on when they're planning to have this done?
So the plan is to have construction start at the end of this year and then hopefully go throughout next year and then have it completed by, I think, the end of 2024, early 2025. There was actually a little bit of a delay in the process because DCR actually came with designs to the community and said, this is what we think might be a good thing to happen here. The community said, we kind of like it, but we also have all these other ideas we want to incorporate into it. And I really commend DCR for saying, okay, we'll take a step back and listen to you more and try to incorporate some more of those ideas into the process. So that's why it's kind of been taking over 2 years to get done, but I think once it is completed, hopefully it's an amenity that the whole community is going to want to see. One thing I didn't mention too, actually, is on the far left-hand side, you see a little bridge icon there. And that's because DCR is hoping to create a pedestrian bridge there that would connect the Edgewater Drive project to the Neponset River Greenway Trail, which is only 100 yards from these folks, but they have really, really hard time accessing it because they have to go all the way around to Mattapan Square or down into Hyde Park to get around over some of those bridges right now. So DCR actually had a public meeting last week to kick off that project and start getting some community input around that. Yeah.
I see on the key that there's like a trail circulation. That trail doesn't exist right now. Is that right?
Trail circulation. Oh,
The dotted, is it the dotted line?
I believe it's the dotted line, yes. So the trail currently exists basically from the one opening that exists right here at Topalian Street.
Yeah.
And it goes down to, it actually goes down to right about here. But there's an opening, or they're going to try to create an opening here that would allow the trail to actually go on the neighborhood side of the river. So it actually is a little misleading now that you mention it, because half of it does exist, but the other half does not quite exist at this time. Good questions. Anything else? Okay. The other Greenway project I wanted to talk about is a little bit upstream of the Edgewater Drive project, which is our Doyle Park effort. Similarly, there's been this green space right along River Street. People have not used it for a very long time, even though it's publicly accessible. That's partially because right now it looks like a vacant lot. Basically, there's this open space. There was a blank wall in it. There was old playground equipment that was kind of left behind that wasn't usable. And similar to Edgewater Drive, the community for a while has been advocating for that space to be improved, for it to be safe, accessible, and inviting to them and their neighbors. And luckily in 2021 again, DCR said, okay, we'll also make Doyle one of our capital projects. And this is one of the more recent designs that you see here. So again, you don't really have much to compare it to, but right now it's basically just a grassy lawn with not much tree plantings or anything like that. So one of the pieces that the community wanted to see that DCR is incorporating is including some more trees in parts of the park. They're also going to improve the walkway that currently does exist down here. It's like a dirt path along the river, but it's not extremely inviting. So again, by having some stairs incorporated, by making it a little bit wider and putting some kind of material down to make it safe and hopefully ADA accessible, with the river overlook as well, folks are going to want to kind of come into the park more, interact with the Neponset River more, and hopefully care about the river more. This project is actually a little bit farther along than the Edgewater project is. They're almost at 100% design, and DCR is going to be meeting with the Boston Conservation Commission later this month to get the final approval on everything, and then hopefully have construction start kind of on the back end of this summer, early fall. So those are two of the Boston-based projects that we're working on, and I want to talk about a couple other projects that involve Boston, but also involve Quincy as well. We've actually been working with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to try to think about better connections from the Boston area, and including Quincy as well, down to the Blue Hills. Because a lot of people live within maybe a couple miles of the Blue Hills, but don't have an easy way of getting there unless they have a car. The public transit's not great, the trail systems are not great, and so we've been currently meeting with some of the community stakeholders, some of the bike groups, some of the neighborhood associations, to get some initial input on what people would want to see in a connection down to the Blue Hills. We've actually met with Quincycles. We've met with, I think, some of the planning folks in the city of Quincy. They've already got some good ideas about what can maybe happen on Quincy Shore Drive and some other locations around the city. Again, it's probably hard for folks to take the QR code right now, but I can send around more information later. We'd love to get, again, input from the local stakeholders on what we'd like to see in this kind of connection. And then in addition to that project, one of the ones that we're currently working on as we speak is improving access on the Quincy River Walk. Does anyone know where this puddle is?
I know.
Some folks do?
Try it all the time.
Yeah, good. I was just out there for about 8 hours today, laying down some wood and kind of setting the stakes because today...
We need good equilibrium and balance. So
We do.
I've done that before too.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like that right now. It actually looks even a little bit worse than that right now. But we're in the process of creating a boardwalk that's going to be about 5 feet wide and 140 feet long. And it's going to solve a major issue with the Quincy River Walk because where this blue star is up here is where this puddle is. The reason for that puddle is basically because Swan Point back in the day used to be an airport. Way back in the day, and for many, many years, it was a big wetland, but the airport kind of compacted the ground down, and so when it rains, that rainwater has a really hard time draining and going into the ground. And so that puddle is there for more than half of the year. And so we've been working for a while now with Quincy and with some other folks to get this all permitted. And again, we started construction today, and we're hoping to get it completed tomorrow and Saturday with a big group of volunteers. It's very exciting to see happen, but again, once you do that, folks can actually park up here at Swan Point Park and not have to kind of maneuver their way over those planks, but have easy access all the way down a major portion of the Quincy River Walk. So this is a really exciting project that we're happy to get moving along. Okay, so that's a lot of our Greenway related stuff. One other thing I wanted to talk about as well is the Superfund site. Have folks heard about the Superfund site designation before? Some folks yes, some folks no. Okay, good. So the Superfund site, well, the Superfund program in general is actually a EPA program where certain sites basically get put up to the program. They have to meet a certain criteria, and when they get a certain grading system, if they fall within the boundaries, they are eligible to get large-scale funding for a very big cleanup. It can be all kinds of things, and in our case specifically, it is from some of those legacy pollutants that have been in the river and in the sediment for decades at this point. So there is a 3.7 section stretch of the river between where Mother Brook comes in and the Hyde Park area, going all the way down to the Baker Dam and Lower Mills, that has been designated as a Superfund site. It's been going on for a little over a year now. Basically what this means is, like I mentioned, EPA gets to come in. They've been working with DEP for a little while to collect samples and figure out where the highest levels of pollutants are. But this allows them to basically come in and over the next couple of years, gather some input, collect more samples, and then in the end, remove all of those chemicals to make the river safer for humans, but also safer for the fish and the other animals that rely on it as well. The main chemical that they are hoping to remove is called polychlorinated biphenyls, which is PCBs for short. That is a chemical that I think was actually banned back in the 60s or 70s but is still found today in sediment because it is a man-made chemical that does not break down easily. It was used to make electronics, transformers, all kinds of things. And again, it's sitting in the mud, and it's specifically actually sitting in the highest levels, we think, and EPA thinks, right behind the T&H Dam and the Baker Dam, because when that chemical is dumped into the river back in the day, it's kind of floating down, but when that water slows down behind the dam, the chemical will kind of settle into the mud and then just sits in the muck behind the dam for many, many years. So we're hoping actually that in the long run, EPA will again be able to dredge behind the dams, remove the other areas that have very high levels of the PCBs, and that would actually hopefully make the dam removal process a lot cheaper so that one day we can actually get the T&H Dam out that would have massive improvements when it comes to the water quality and the habitat for all the animals that live in the river. All right, so let's talk about some climate change impacts on the Neponset. There are all kinds of things that we're already seeing when it comes to climate change, and there's some other things that we're starting to anticipate, and finding ways to try to prepare ourselves as much as possible for the climate change impacts that we think we're going to see. Like I already mentioned earlier, the fish, the habitat issues are really immense. When it comes to having hotter days, having more infrequent storms, when we do get rain, it's a lot of rain at once, that is not great for the fish. As I mentioned, they like the cold water, they like the shaded areas, and that's not really going to be happening as frequently when it comes to having these hotter days. And so that's why we're doing so much habitat restoration work to try to protect the fish in the long run. Another problem that we're seeing actually is algae blooms that have really big effects on not just fish, but can also affect humans and dogs as well. This happens a lot when we're using way too much fertilizer on our yards, and when that's happening, again, it gets into our waterways like all the other stormwater does, and that basically is providing a lot of this algae and other plants nutrients to grow when they really shouldn't be growing in certain areas. And so we've seen some algae blooms on Lake Massapog and Sharon and some other areas. And again, we're working with the towns to better educate folks on why you shouldn't use fertilizer and why climate change mixing with the fertilizer is so bad for the bodies of water. I already talked a lot about the dams, why that's going to have impacts on habitat restoration, and as well as the stormwater. Again, a lot of these pipes, and I'll show an image right now as well, that's partially to do with the smaller pipes. Our infrastructure right now is not ready for these big rainstorms, and it's really having drastic effects. We've already been seeing that in some areas. This was actually a photo taken in Norwood in 2020 when there was, I think, almost 3 inches of rain dropped in one section of the town within an hour. And of course, the pipes cannot handle that. So that led to the Norwood Hospital getting completely flooded, this parking lot being completely flooded. And again, it was really because our infrastructure is not ready to handle this kind of stuff. So we anticipate seeing more of these storms in the future, more frequently than we think we're going to see them or than we've seen them in the past. And it's important that we do what we can to prepare ourselves for them and hopefully get the money to improve the infrastructure all across the watershed and across the greater Boston area. Kind of more Quincy specific, we've already seen a lot more estuary flooding as well. We have these things called king tides, which some of you may have heard of before. They basically happen when you have the right moon alignment and sun alignment mixed with also a storm surge, which makes this really, really big flooding issue. This is actually the Billings Creek Trail, I think, off of Commander State Boulevard that was flooded back in February. This is the Neponset Greenway Trail over in Dorchester. Here's actually another picture of the Riverwalk as well. So again, these are just some images showing flooding that hasn't really happened in the past, but it's happening more frequently. And it's important to work with the towns, work with the cities, work with the program that's called Climate Ready Boston to think about how can we make the Neponset estuary and the surrounding communities more prepared for climate change to be happening. Here's also another picture I put in here too that I think was taken at Tennion Beach in Dorchester. It's hard to probably see, but the pipes are so backed up that the ocean water is coming out of the pipes into the beach. And I've actually seen little minnows come out of this before and swim around in the parking lot sometimes. So pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, we really need to improve our infrastructure and make it safer for all our communities in the long run. All right, so we only have a couple more slides left, but I want to talk about a couple things that you all can be doing to get more involved and to have an impact on this in your own community. One thing, of course, is volunteering. We have a bunch of events coming up that I'll show at the end, like our major river cleanup that we have on Earth Day. We have invasive removals going on throughout the summer as well, where you can work with us in the city to try to remove certain invasives in Quincy and other locations. But it's really nice to kind of get everyone involved in this effort and try to make a difference, because we're a small organization of about 10 folks, and so there's a huge area that we're trying to work in, and it's really impactful when we can partner with the communities to really see the changes that we all want to see in these neighborhoods. One other thing that you can be doing and that we've actually been working on a little bit in Quincy is creating these things called rain gardens, which are best management practices for trying to capture some of the storm water that, again, is polluting the river so frequently. If you have a way for basically the water to be running off into a garden or some kind of natural filtration system, a lot of that storm water can actually go into the ground instead of going right into these sewer systems or these storm drain systems that head right into the river. So here are a couple pictures of people's that they have at home. That was actually a picture that we did, I think we did that rain garden back in the mid-2010s at Xaverian High School, but we've actually been working with Quincy to figure out where we can be implementing these across the city. I believe we're at the point now where there's 3 different projects that are in the design phase to have rain gardens created, I believe at the Snug Harbor Elementary School, the Beechwood Mill one, and the Montclair School, if I'm not mistaken. So again, we're trying to find ways to capture the storm water in an area where we know there's a lot of it coming in at once, get it to filter into the ground instead of heading right into the river and polluting the river so much. I also just talked about this as well, but one thing that we can be doing a lot more frequently is, one, watering our yards a lot less, especially in droughts. That is a time where it's really important to have that water staying in the ground, staying in our drinking water systems instead of usually evaporating or going onto the street and becoming part of the stormwater. So that's important to do, but also trying to find ways to not fertilize your lawn as much. Like I said, the algae blooms are really serious. We've been seeing them more frequently now, and we really do understand the impacts that they have on the local fish species and also humans and the animals and the dogs. So we really want to use less fertilizer when we can, and when you do use fertilizer, try to use a more natural material that's not going to have such drastic environmental impacts. So those are just some of the things that you can all be doing. Again, this is one of my last slides, but our goal, like I mentioned, is really just to clean and protect the river and make it more accessible for people. We have big hopes and dreams of making it swimmable year-round for everyone. We have access, and hopefully people will have access to lay down in a canoe, for example, on the river, and do all these activities that people should be able to do in their own community, right? People shouldn't have to drive up to Maine or go somewhere else to enjoy nature, but we have so much of it in our own communities here. So if we all do our part to clean up a little bit more and contribute less to stormwater pollution and to advocate for some more of these important laws to be made, it's really going to have drastic impacts in the long run on the river and the watershed. So thank you for your time today. A couple events up here that are coming up, like I mentioned. Sally already mentioned the walk that we're doing on the 18th that me and Maura are leading. That should be a really fun one that I'm looking forward to. We'll actually go over to Dorchester to walk on part of the Greenway and see the Quincy River Walk from the other side. Like I mentioned already too, we have our big Earth Day cleanup coming up. We have a nice paddle happening. I believe this paddle is going to be in the Milton area in the big wetland we have in the middle of the watershed called Fowl Meadow, which is really pretty. We have our big Neponset Day event, which we usually have hundreds of people come out to a park in Dorchester, kind of get out on canoes and do all kinds of fun activities. And then we have our big annual meeting coming up as well on June 13th. But you can go to our website, neponset.org, to find out more information on all these. And I can also give Sally and the library some more information so that can also be passed around to folks as well. Yes?
Can we talk a little bit more about stormwater? You
Yes.
mentioned it a number of times. So I sort of have a two-part question.
Yeah.
I'm from Milton, and we have a stormwater tax. I'm wondering if the city of Quincy has something like that, and the other towns in the Neponset watershed. And how does that money, if you know, get used?
Yes.
And you also mentioned E. coli, and can you explain a little bit more about what E. coli is?
Yes.
And, yeah, that's basically.
Both great questions. So the stormwater tax in Milton, I think, is awesome, and I think has already seen drastic improvements when it comes to the funds that Milton has to create certain stormwater improvements. If I'm not mistaken, I think Milton was the first town in the watershed to do it. I think there's one other town, I know Norwood's looking into it, and there might be another town that already has it. I don't think Quincy has a stormwater utility bill, right? People are shaking their heads no. So basically, from what I understand with it, it's basically a tax that goes into a very specific pool of money that allows the town, when they're creating these designs for stormwater improvements, to just take money right out of that tax, and it's only used for that purpose, basically. So Milton has already seen a bunch of rain gardens being built. They have tree box filters, which are really cool. It's basically like a little slit in the sidewalk where the stormwater is running into, and there's a box in the ground that a tree's coming out of, so it looks pretty on the sidewalk, but all the dirt and the tree roots are kind of filtering out some of those pollutants before it goes into the storm drain system. So again, I think it's been going on for, what, at least 4 or 5 years now, or not quite?
I would guess maybe 3.
Okay. But I've heard great things about it. I think for the most part, Milton residents aren't too upset with it. I think when it comes to a new tax, everyone's like not of course in love with it, but I think when you think about the improvements it's going to have, I think it's pretty beneficial. So hopefully Quincy and other areas start thinking about considering that as well. And E. coli, thank you for asking that. So E. coli is a bacteria that is found in warm mammals, or warm animals such as mammals. So it's found in human fecal matter, in dog waste, and a couple other locations. And so it can be a real indicator of if there's like a leak of a sewage pipe coming into a body of water if you find high E. coli, or again, if the dog waste, for example, is being thrown next to the storm drain systems or it's anywhere close to it and the rain brings it in, that's going to bring it right into the body of water. And when it comes to the effects of E. coli, that's kind of one of the bacteria that have a huge effect on humans. If there's little kids, for example, swimming in a beach in the watershed, specifically I think Wallaston Beach and some other areas have had high levels of E. coli in the past. If kids ingest that by accident, or even if adults ingest the water by accident, if there's a wave that comes in, that can give you some pretty upset stomach and some other issues going on there, and it can lead to some effects that people don't want to have. So that's why we do a lot of testing for E. coli and try to limit the amount that we're seeing in the watershed.
And how do you get rid of E. coli if you find a high levels?
So getting rid of it's about improving the infrastructure and trying to educate people a lot on the importance of picking up after your dogs, because that is definitely one way that we've seen a lot of E. coli.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if the Neponset would be a candidate. I've seen pictures, and I don't have examples of places where they've been used, but they have these nettings that go across the river to catch the plastics, microplastics, and even nanoplastics. And I was wondering if that's ever been considered or if it's been applied anywhere along the Neponset.
I don't think it's been applied anywhere, but I definitely think it has been considered before. I feel like before I started at NEPR, there was some talks about doing that, and I'm not sure where those ended up going, but I think it would be something that's worth considering because, like you said, you can capture a lot of that stuff that's both coming out of the river into the ocean and also that's coming in from the ocean. I think that could be really impactful on reducing a lot of the microplastics that we're seeing across the watershed. So I definitely think we should be considering it more than we are right now. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I was also wondering, I've been just hearing so much about PFAS lately, and I'm just
Yes.
wondering, like, how that, if it would be in the river, how it would affect people using the river.
Yeah. PFAS it's kind of a scary thing, I'm not going to lie, because it's everywhere. PFAS is a chemical that's really used in waterproofing materials, so most of our rain jackets, our shoes, even like pizza boxes and other things like that have PFAS in them, and it hasn't really been a chemical that that humans in general have done a lot of research on until somewhat recently. But PFAS is kind of being found all over the planet, and I think there are some bodies of water in the Neponset that the state has tested that they have found high levels of PFAS in too, because the threshold for them that they're trying to have bodies of water meet is so low that it's very easy for that level to be above it. So we've even found it in some drinking water sources, like in Sharon, for example, and they've had to close down that well and try to find a way to filter it out. So again, it's still so early on in the overall scheme of researching PFAS and figuring out what to do with it, but something that we're definitely aware of and that we're trying to work with the state more to figure out what can we do in the Neponset to make it safer for people in the long run.
Because I think about the third of the people living in the watershed that are
Yes.
getting their water from it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't even know, like, for example, I actually, does Quincy get their drinking water from the Quabbin Reservoir? Do we know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure the state's probably been testing the Quabbin to see what the PFAS levels are there. I don't know what the data looks like, but yeah, it's really everywhere, unfortunately. So it's really important to start figuring out how can we remove it from the bodies of water, especially the drinking water sources, and do more research on looking into what are the long-term health effects of humans of it. Yeah.
Did you say when the Watershed Association was started, or how long it's been around?
Yeah, so it started in 1967, and it was basically all volunteer-led until, I believe, the mid-1990s. And actually, our executive director was the first staff member back in the 1990s. And so he's been around for a while and is extremely knowledgeable in all the work that's happened over the watershed in the past couple of decades. But actually, part of the reason why the Watershed Association was founded was because back in the 60s, that was just before the big environmental movement, basically. But that was around the time that the state was thinking about putting 95 right through the middle of the watershed up into Boston. And that would have gone right through the big wetland we have in the middle, which is Fowl Meadow. Nowadays, it's considered an area of critical environmental concern. There's tons of amphibian and bird species that are endangered that live there right now. So thank God they were able to basically, well, they got 95 to go all the way around, and it's kind of a hassle to kind of go around that turn there. But yes, they did really protect the river and the watershed in that sense, and that is kind of the formation of the Watershed Association and brought us to where we are today. Anything else? Yeah.
The people who get their drinking water from the river, how does that happen? Wells or?
Yeah, so it's from groundwater wells, and so I mean the river and the groundwater it mixes very easily all underground. But there are drinking water wells throughout the watershed that are drawing water out of the ground, going through the filtration system, being tested by the towns, and then making their way to people's homes. So I don't believe we have any sources in the watershed where people are getting their drinking water from surface water, from like lakes or ponds or anything like that. I believe it's all groundwater wells.
Where the rotary is at Marina Bay there.
Yes.
There's a sign and a pathway, DEQ, it has some kind of a state sign, and you can follow it all the way into inland, all the way to Ayers.
This way.
Yeah, that's Billings Creek. That's where we were, Billings Creek.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yes.
That's where we were last week.
There's a lot of World War II relics there.
Yes,
A lot of
there
it.
is. There's a lot of stuff back there that should never be put there, and it's hard.
I should say, this is the best time of the year to do exploring. There's no leaves, and it's better if there's a light snow cover. Then you can
Okay.
distinguish the turf to the plant life.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been thinking about what to do with that area because, like you said, a lot of stuff that has a lot of actually old chemicals in it too. So it's about like how are you going to remove it safely? Probably using volunteers is not always the best idea when it comes to some of those old materials. So we've been thinking about what to do. But you're right. There's like have you seen like the big rebar piece that's back there? It's a whole mess that's over there.
It's vine covered, I think. Everything is vine covered.
It's all vine covered at this point. Yeah. So we've done some cleanups back there. We've gone kind of the easy plastics, the easy things to remove. But when it comes to some of that older stuff, we probably need to figure out if there's an easier way to do it and a safer way to do it than having volunteers tackle some of it.
2 years ago, I went in there for the second time,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in about 100 yards, about the length of a football field, and I see a coyote looking
That's
at me. I had my steel cane, and I walked right back up. Because
That's
you don't know if there's a pack of coyotes there.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and I've heard from a lot of our Mattapan and Hyde Park residents that they've been seeing even more deer, and they've been wondering what does that mean? Why are we seeing more deer? Why are we seeing more coyotes? There was a big outreach initiative by the Urban Wild Department of the city last year to alert people. Yes, there's more coyotes, and this is what you need to do to be more safe because they're not going anywhere. We can't really control that, nor should we really control that to a degree. So you just have to be more aware of it. It's cool that you got to see one, but I understand why you turned around. But yeah, if you want to come out, anyone wants to come out this weekend, again, we already have a lot of volunteers, but if you're looking to do something on a nice day, either tomorrow or Saturday, we'll be out there making a beautiful boardwalk, and then again, hopefully by the end of this weekend, you'll be able to use the boardwalk and kind of go in either direction, all up and down the river walking, and do it safely without having to wade through water.
Have you ever taken the beach way, not the trail, but the beach way?
I
On
have
the whole circumference.
the whole, like, going up this way?
Yes.
I have not
The
gone this
whole
way. I've only
circumference,
gone this way on the beach. What's that like? What's going on here like? Is it just beachfront basically
Yeah,
until you
right.
get to this?
Yes, it is, all
Yeah.
beachfront.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I don't think I've done that.
It's better on the bottoms of your feet. You know, you don't have the constant concussion.
Very nice.